New episode of Written on the Pitch starring Jessica Charman. Jess, how are you?
Doing well. Thank you very much. How about yourself?
Doing well. We were talking about it before we got started. It's a weird spring because normally we would be already into the MLS season, already into the USL Championship and USL League One seasons. We're not. We'd be getting ready for NWSL, which we are. The Challenge Cup will be starting in April, so that's very cool. You have college games that are kind of meaningful for some, kind of really not for others, but it's not a normal spring season either. It's still really weird.
Yeah, it's, we thought that maybe 2020 would be the end of the weirdness, but definitely not quite. We're looking forward to hopefully getting some sense of normalcy back soon. But right now, it's just unpredictable, we'll call it. And as two individuals that like to call soccer matches, it's really a little difficult because you don't know whether you have a game or not because of COVID protocols.
Yeah, it's proven to be a real challenge, not just here in the States, but we're seeing it now with even clubs like Inter. PSG's women's team and academy was shut down for a little while. They had to forfeit a Champions League second leg to Sparta Prague, but they won 5-0 in the first leg, so that forfeit was still okay. That means they go through 5-3. It was it's still awkward, and I think we're all still finding our way through. Hopefully, the normalcy is coming. One thing that came up in our questions out to the listeners this week that was pretty cool is mentioned the UEFA Champions League on the women's side. Concacaf is now going to launch a women's Champions League, and that's not all. They're going to launch a women's Nations League, too. Ricky Ricardo wanted to hear your thoughts on, I think, both of those announcements, because they're both huge at the club game and at the national team game.
Yeah, let's start with the national team game. What's so important about having a year-round thing between Olympics, between World Cups, is it encourages those nations that don't necessarily invest year-round to do that, because now you have a purpose every year and not just focusing on the World Cup here. You look at teams like Jamaica and the Reggae Girls that had to be funded for the World Cup. Well, now they're going to need to be asking for funding year-round. So it's a good incentive for those countries that maybe have slacked on supporting their women's teams, that they're going to have to up their game on that.
Yeah, it's a big step by CONCACAF to make them do it. I mean, I think in a perfect world, like, you'd have countries like Jamaica, Costa Rica, Honduras, countries that have had strong men's teams that would fund the women's program because they want to. But there really isn't for those countries. I mean, who are they going to play in those years in between the Olympic qualifying and the World Cup? And, you're talking about 3 years potentially of nothing, trying to find friendlies. And it's not exactly easy for Honduras to get women's friendlies right now.
No, you're giving purpose to those games, and you're giving purpose to fans as well. We see a lot of times that gets good crowd, good support, good viewing numbers when it's the World Cup. But in between, what is there? Not many people realistically want to sit down and watch nothing friendlies a lot of the time. So you're creating access to this level in countries all over the world now.
I was pleasantly surprised with the Nations League idea in Europe when they started it with the national teams. I was really skeptical. I was like, well, why don't you let them come in from a U.S. perspective? Well, this is going to hurt the U.S. national team because they're not going to be able to get those teams in friendlies like they used to. Mm-hmm. I was really pleasantly surprised with the level. The First Nations League went really well. The games have a little bite to them. It's good.
Yeah, because now these players feel like they're playing for something. We talked off air about how sometimes it's really difficult when games don't matter to get spurred on and upped for them. Yes, players are competing for their places and trying to cause questions for coaches for those games that matter, but now you have something to play for, and we see it having more of an impact on those players, and they seem to be playing with more fight and more passion, and you're trying to pick your best teams. You're not just using these games to give side players minutes.
And at the national team level in CONCACAF, there's no way around it. The U.S. is going to dominate this early on. Canada will be right there. Mexico is improving. Costa Rica has invested on the women's side, maybe ahead of some of the others. they're going to be the ones that win games, and there's going to be some lopsided games. It will happen, and that's okay, because the process should lift everybody else up at the Nations League level.
When you play against the best teams, it's the only way you get better. Yes, sometimes it can be demoralizing, and we may see some games that aren't as enjoyable to watch, because not many people enjoy watching one-sided, high-level scoring games. But it might be a wake-up call to some of those nations, that, okay, we're not gifted with the US, who have had a history of investment or a history of playing at higher level in the women's game, but now we want to compete. We don't want to, in inverted commas, embarrass ourselves on a national level. So they're going to be incentivized to compete. And incentivized, how do we do that? Well, we're going to need to fund on the women's side of the game. We're going to need to fund at the grassroots level. We're going to need to fund at the professional level. Maybe we need to look into how we can create more professional leagues for women.
Yeah, and if you create it where you have maybe a group of 4 at the top, and if it's US, if it's Canada, Mexico, and Costa Rica are the ones that come to mind for me. Okay, then you have a second tier that Jamaica would have a good shot at winning. Maybe Haiti is a surprise there. And you start to see that push. Okay, the winner of the League B, like we see in Europe, moves up. And the bottom team in Group
like promotion
A moves
and relegation in a national level. And honestly, that makes those Group A games, where maybe the US is storming to victory like we saw them in the She Believes Cup, but those games between Mexico and Costa Rica suddenly have huge importance, because they don't want to lose that credit of being in the top group. They don't want to move into Group B. That's embarrassing. So it makes all the games matter.
And you get that home and away too. I mean, it's one thing for the US to beat everybody in the United States, but go to Canada in a meaningful game and have to get a result. Go to Mexico. And look, we've seen it in Liga MX Femenil, where you're seeing big crowds turn out.
Oh, and those games are exciting to watch too. We turned on, Tigres, and we see that they're investing money, and like you say, Jason, they're getting fans, because the fans of the men's team, because they are connected, and these men's teams have such big fan bases, they're embracing the women's side. And that's what I wish we saw more on the level of NWSL and MLS, because those teams aren't always connected fully. There is a bit of a divide between the fan bases, instead of adopting each other and supporting each other.
You get into a situation where, because we really haven't had it at the World Cup qualifying level, but you have a U.S.-Mexico women's match that is meaningful in the Nations League at the Estadio Azteca. I mean, that's a defining moment. Yeah, it's a scary place for the U.S. women to go, and it's a moment that can change women's soccer and Concacaf as a whole.
And I think, like you say, Jason, perhaps on US soil, you see these games being not easy, but confident wins for the US potentially, but take a fish out of their water or out of their pond, and it can be a whole different ballgame.
And then you get into the club side and the Champions League side of it, and it's the same idea. We've seen the Houston Dash go down to Monterrey and play Tigres and learn a lot from the experience. You're starting to see NWSL scout Liga MX Femenil. You're seeing a few players with NWSL experience go to play in Mexico, go to play in Costa Rica. Now you have, again, the opportunity not just to have an International Champions Cup and have people come to Cary, North Carolina to play the North Carolina Courage. You have the Courage potentially going to Monterrey to play Tigres in a meaningful game.
Yeah, it's a whole different level. And like you say, it will bring up more teams getting to play, but also it will encourage those nations that don't have professionally funded sides, that they need to sort of pump a bit of money in, because it's not fair for them to go and have to play against the Mexican sides or the US sides if they don't have full-time training and full-time players.
And it'll be the same kind of idea. It'll take a little bit of time. You'll have your top clubs from Mexico that I think can put up a challenge. You'll have your clubs in Costa Rica that will be up for the battle but have a lot to learn. And then there'll be a drop-off, and that's okay. The other thing that I think really this could spur is investment on the Canadian side, where the national team program is strong, but we don't have club teams in Canada.
No, and they need to look into that. because Canada has been in the past a powerful nation, at the international side. But we've seen a drop off, and we talked again during the She Believes Cup about this new era that's needing to come in. They had a lot of older players and they can't play forever. So how are you going to encourage your homegrown players to sort of step up and move on to the next level? And do you always want to see them jumping ship and going straight to US sides? Shouldn't you have some homegrown teams, some academy programs for these girls to stay closer to home?
Yeah, it'd be exciting if the Canadian Premier League is in a position to be able to support a women's league, or even the NWSL maybe supporting a Canadian division. I don't know what it looks like straight away. We've seen Vancouver with the Whitecaps invest in the women's game in the past. I think Toronto could potentially, get into that, Montreal as well, and in some of the bigger Canadian Premier League teams. It could be a really exciting initiative to grow the game. And that's where I am on all of this. I think a lot of people will pick on a blowout because it'll happen in both. It'll happen in the Nations League. It'll happen in the Women's Champions League in Concacaf. They'll pick on that and they'll say, we're not ready. There's not enough good teams. There's not enough competition. But I think you almost have to have those to get to where you want it to get.
You have to start. You can't wait and not act because you're worried about blowouts. You have to start, because if you don't ever start, it's never going to get better. You have to take that chance that, okay, we're going to see some one-sided matches, but you see that on the men's side of the game all the time. Even in the World Cup, we see blowouts, because particularly as you open the pool to more teams, you're going to see more disparity. But that's okay, because once you start, you allow those nations, you allow those teams an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to grow, and an opportunity to improve. And 10 years down the line, it's going to be far more competitive, but only if you begin it sooner rather than later.
I'm excited for what it can be. And you're right, it's going to take some time to get there. But it's worth the investment of time, because I think that investment of time will then spark an investment of cash.
Yeah, because they're going to see the worth of the game. And like I say, it's more opportunities for people to sit in their homes and watch the game in more competitive matches. And that's what most people want to watch, competitive matches.
We had a couple of questions from Day on Twitter, and I want to start with this one. Why do y'all think academies and at least 4 MLS teams passed on Daryl Dike, the Orlando striker who is on loan at Barnsley in the championship? I mean, players get missed, and you see that all the time.
Jamie Vardy.
Yeah.
Stacking shelves until his mid-20s.
There's so many.
Get missed.
It happens. They're not ready at that age, whatever. In the U.S., you get situations with, depending on where they grow up, they might not be noticed as much. There's so many elements to it. I think the more important question with this, and you follow the championship a lot closer than I do, we saw Jordan Morris, Paul Arriola go to Swansea, now Dike at Barnsley. I think for a long time there was a perception that MLS was not at the championship level, and people are getting hung up on comparing team to team. As we see here, players can absolutely fit at the championship level, and championship players can come to MLS and do well on the flip side. There's not a straight line comparison in my mind. Am I off with that?
No, I think you're right. A lot of it, unfortunately, roots in English football, soccer culture. And I was guilty of it too before Atlanta United sort of existed. I was a bit of a soccer snob, and I thought that, MLS was this, MLS was that. And we grow up in England a lot of the time, particularly in the last 10 years until now, when it started to improve and be watched more, and Sky Sports is giving airtime to MLS and it's becoming a credible league. In the past, unfortunately, there was a stigma and stereotype from people that had never really watched MLS, but they just thought, oh, it's not very good because it's American, or what do Americans know about the game? And, unfortunately, when you hear that enough times and you're naive to it and you don't stand up and watch the game, you grow up believing that. Now I think when I watch Atlanta United and I watch Reading, the games are of a similar level. The players are of a similar level. We see players make the jump and not see any issues. I think the biggest reason players struggle is if they go to a team that doesn't fit their style of play, no matter which country they're playing in.
Mm-hmm.
You have to find the right pieces to a puzzle. A number 9, that wants to hold the ball up isn't going to fit into a team that wants to play a different style of play. You just have to find a team that suits your style, whether that's in England or America. And that's why sometimes we see players move to England and struggle if they're not going to a team that fits their style. Or on the flip side, there's players that might make the jump from England to MLS and struggle because it doesn't suit them. So I think you have to look more at the individual player and the club they're going to see if they're successful, rather than just put MLS in a big bubble and put the championship in a big bubble.
Yeah, you're never going to be able to truly answer the question because they're not going to play in the same league. It's impossible. I mean, even people who do it, and I saw it a bunch this week with, the struggles of Spain in Champions League. People are like, oh, the Spanish teams are down. Spanish soccer's down. Well, I mean, there's very good soccer being played in Spain. Then I also saw somebody when Atalanta lost to Real Madrid, like, oh, they would struggle to stay up in La Liga. No, that's crazy talk. Like that's nonsense. Like when we compare these leagues, it's impossible to actually truly do it because they don't play in the same sandbox.
No, and the thing is, when they do have little friendlies against each other, it's a one-off. You're seeing one team play against another. You can't base an entire league. Of course, there's weaker teams in the championship and stronger team in the championship. There's the same in MLS. You can't just compare and, it's not one size fits all with these teams.
No, it's so hard to compare. I mean, I will opt for watching more MLS because it's my league, like it's cities that I know, it's places I've been, it's a league that's always meant more to me.
I'll be honest, Jason. I only watch Reading games because I care about them. I don't really make an effort to sit down and watch other championship games, whereas a lot of the time I do watch other MLS games, and I'm not sure why that is at the moment. I can't tell you exactly why I seem to enjoy MLS matches more, but I do at the moment, and I think that sometimes they're more competitive and they're more fast flowing as when I think back to it.
Yeah, I think the thing about the players' side is that perception that you talked about at the beginning is starting to go away. It's the idea MLS is a retirement league, MLS isn't a quality league. You're seeing players like Alphonso Davies go almost straight into Bayern Munich and be one of the best left backs in the world. And he was not the best left back in Major League Soccer when he left. He was very young. But you also see players come here and some do well. Zlatan came and did well, but he didn't win championships straight away. It wasn't that simple for him. And you see players come and struggle. And that happens too. And, players moving to different leagues and succeeding or struggling happens all over the world. MLS is just part of that all over the world conversation now, where I think they were left out before.
Yeah, I think MLS, again, I do think a large part of that is how much wider the reach for MLS is now. I see a lot of English Twitter followers that also have an MLS team written in their bios now, for instance. It didn't used to be like that. It used to be that you had your one club in England that you supported and you maybe watched some Premier League games, but would you ever sit down and watch a MLS game? Would you stay up late at night to watch it? No, you wouldn't. Now, people, because it's accessible, because it's on Sky Sports and it's being broadcast at, decent times to watch it, people are sitting down and they're realizing, okay, actually, I want to follow Atlanta United. I want to follow them from England as well because it's fun to watch.
It's really starting to change, and I think over the next 10 years, it will look so different when we get to 2030, 2031. I can't wait to see what it turns into. Day had another question, an Atlanta United specific one. Who's the enforcer going to be? And this is something that comes up from time to time with different teams. I mean, I think back to Roy Keane. I think of Gennaro Gattuso, like the kind of old school defensive midfielder who you were worried about dribbling across the middle because you'd get a studs up tackle to your kneecaps. Is this something you think Atlanta United needs?
I think it's a tough one. I think we need all our players to have a level of physicality that sometimes I was critical of last season. There were moments where we seemed a bit soft and not nitty-gritty enough. Do we need I don't want to say dirty, but sometimes a little dirty player? I don't know if we need that. When you look at the rest of Day-Day's tweet, he mentions how he would love to see, or he likes to see a player get slammed into the sideboarding. I mean, look, I'm all for, even as a goalkeeper, you leave you step on their feet a little bit at a corner, you go in with your hands and your knee up at a corner kick and let them know you're there. I'm all for letting a player know they're there. But when you take it to a level that's too far of gamesmanship, you're taking a risk. And he brought up Escobar and LGP and the criticisms they had at times of being a liability. And I think there's a difference. I embraced Franco Escobar when he was playing physical and LGP when they were playing physical. But there were the moments where they lost their heads and did become a liability, picking up, a yellow card every match. You were beginning to cost your game. You have to learn when it's the right time to be physical and leave your foot in, and when you're jeopardizing a team's performance by maybe getting sent off. So I'm all for Atlanta United being a physical team. I do think there were moments last season where we didn't have enough physical presence, but I don't think you need a designated player that the opposition is, worried about going in studs up and breaking their legs.
Yeah, I think the game's changed a little bit. I mean, I didn't really look at Escobar and LGP as enforcers. I think they were passionate players, emotional players, at times too emotional. For the most part, I didn't care if they picked up yellow cards in play and tackles and making challenges.
The dissent yellow cards.
Yeah, those were the ones that would frustrate me because they weren't really necessary.
Those are the ones where, I think, like you say, picking up a yellow for a good challenge, a smart challenge that slows down and breaks down the run of play, all good. Picking up yellow cards for dissent or in the aftermath, or giving a player a little push here or there. We think back to Franco Escobar's last game when he came back on after being red carded. That was a moment of madness on his part, but we enjoyed having them there. They're effective players, but I don't think it's, as you say, necessary for a player to be an enforcer and be the player that oppositions are worried about. I think that every player should have a physical presence. I'd like to see all of them be a bit more aggressive sometimes in the challenge and be the one that wants to get there first in a challenge. That's okay, but we don't need someone that's leaving in late just because.
Yeah, there's a difference, and I think you will see what you're talking about this season, because it's a hallmark of the way that Gabriel Heinze approaches the game. And we've had a chance this week on Stoppage Time and on Soccer Down Here to hear from guys like Machop Chol and Ben Lundgaard and Jackson Conway and Tyler Wolf. And the word that keeps coming up is intense about the training sessions, and intense about the attention to detail, and intense about the pressure that you'll be both playing against, where you're going to build up out of the back, and we'll talk about that from a goalkeeper's perspective, but also what you're going to do to the other team. It's going to be a different way of playing, and I think because of that, it's not going to be one enforcer. It's going to be a whole team that will get into a tackle, that will put pressure on the opposition, that will knock people around a little bit, because it's the way you're going to have to play to be disruptive. And I think without the ball, Atlanta United will strive to be a very disruptive team this year.
Yeah, and I think intensity is such a good word for it, because sorry, my baby crying. Intensity is such a good word for it, because that was sometimes what we were missing last season. There were moments where it did just seem like players didn't want it enough and they didn't want to get stuck in. So I'm sure there'll be lots of people that enjoy watching that urgency to push and disrupt, like you say, be a bit scrappy, because sometimes we weren't scrappy enough.
Urgency is another good word for it, and I think that's something that I was looking for a little bit more last year at times, and it's a weird year. I mean, that urgency is sometimes a little more difficult to dial up when there's no fans in the stands and it's an awkward feeling. I don't think we'll have that this year. I think even in places that are a little bit slower to bounce back, there'll be at least a small number of fans in the stands. That's what it's sounding like at this point.
It makes such a difference.
Yeah.
We don't talk about it enough, about that home field advantage and having someone there to give you that second wind behind your back because you're being held accountable by your fan base. So I know that everyone is very excited to have crowds back, even if it's smaller, like you say.
There were games last year that I felt would have turned out very differently if there had been fans in the stands. The Red Bulls game at home was one. There were a couple other games at home that I thought would. There were even a couple of games on the road that I thought would. It just, it was a different feel, and hopefully that urgency is back from day one, minute one. Something Ben Lundgaard said to us on Today's Soccer down here when we were talking to him about how things were different and how things were going to be this season, he talked about how he is so much more involved as a field kind of player in the build-up, and all the goalkeepers will be. And he stressed how this team will build up out of the back, and they're not going to be pulling tricks and flicks like Alisson or Ederson do, but
thank goodness.
Yeah, he said he's not going to be doing that. He promised us.
He says it now, though. He says it now. Just wait. He'll have one moment where he does something, and we're like, you told us you wouldn't, Ben.
He builds up that confidence, and he starts pulling rainbows and stuff. It's something that I think has to be accepted, and you have to know going in, because there will be a mistake. There will probably be multiple, and it will happen. And not all of them are going to end up giving up a goal, but the trade-off is why you do it. And I think that's what Ben stressed is if you build up the play properly, you're eliminating 2, 3, sometimes more players from the opposition with passing through that line, and then you have the advantage going forward. That's the reason you do it.
Yeah, it has its worth. We're going to probably have a few heart and mouth moments, and that's okay, because as you say, the risk isn't as high as the benefit you gain from it. But it's a good job that they're having a longish preseason to develop those skills, because as a goalkeeper it is difficult, and you do have to develop that confidence, and you do have to learn where your players are going to show and what passes you have in your range, because all goalkeepers have different ranges. All goalkeepers have different comfort levels. Some are more comfortable clipping across their body than they are opening up their hips, for instance, or left foot, right foot dominance, and they're probably doing a lot of player style workouts at this moment too, in terms of being involved in the play, in terms of being involved in passing drills, for instance, and spending time with your goalkeepers, working on your range of passing and giving good balls, because the most important thing as a goalkeeper is that you're playing balls that are easy to control for your team, so you don't put them into trouble right away.
That could end up being one of the biggest differences this season. I've stressed the wingers playing extremely wide in the build-up and staying wide, and the pressure after losing the ball. But I think the goalkeeper's involvement in the build-up phase will be one of the biggest differences for Atlanta United this season. And if it's done effectively, it can be one of the biggest benefits to Atlanta United.
Because you always have an outlet. You always have an outlet with your goalkeeper too. You add another player onto the pitch in some ways, because a lot of time if you're ignoring your goalkeeper, they're just standard wasting. Whereas if you bring them in the build-up, you have that outlet always.
Yeah, there's always that safety valve. And there's always, I think when it's done right, it's even more than that safety valve. It can be the person who delivers that line-splitting pass to break the press, to send the team forward and create the attack. I'm excited to see Ben in that phase of play. Ben last year for Atlanta United too had a good season. One of the things that you and I have both talked about with him, and one of the things that he stressed, I think one of his strong suits, is his communication. And he talked about it last year being like the old guy on a very young team and having to be very vocal, and that's something that he's comfortable with and has served him well. Now he's the young guy in the goalkeeper crew with Alec Cann and with Brad Kazan, and there'll be players around his age on the team, but that's a real role reversal, and that can be a challenge for goalkeepers as they move up in a club from the second team to the first, where you're the old man at 25 on the second team, and then you're the youngster in the group with the first team.
I think the biggest thing, though, is he just can't afford to change his style of play. One thing as a goalkeeper, even, and I think back to I was 16 when I made my debut for the Watford ladies first team. And I remember going in, and the first thing I did was scream at my defenders. And as crazy as it sounds, I was 16 screaming at, 25, 26-year-old women, some of them far older than me, 30s. But the reason you do it is because that gives you confidence. As a goalkeeper, sometimes if you're not involved very much in the play, if a lot of the game is being played in the opposition half, you have to keep communicating to keep your brain switched on, to keep yourself in the game. And so by doing that, you ensure that you're always alert, and you also ensure that you get that respect from your defensive line. You show them that, you know what, I don't care if I have less experience than you. I'm here, I've earned my spot, and I'm going to play. And I think we'll see that from Lundgaard. He strikes me as a very confident goalkeeper, someone that knows his ability, that feels like he has his deserves, to get that first team contract. So what we want to see from him when he moves in is great communication, particularly from the crosses, from the corners, because that was one of the things that I think Guzan had a good season, but there were moments where things looked a little bit disorganized back there from set plays. And when you look back at the replays, you wonder, was it a communication issue? And if you're putting new players into a team, the most important thing you have is communication. So we'll hope to see a lot of that.
Yeah, I think the confidence is going to be a huge factor. And if you missed out on Ben Lundgaard with us on Soccer Down Here, you can go back on Thursday's show and check it out right in the middle of the show. One other thing that Ben said is what I want to finish with. So John always asks the table of four question, like who would be your ideal 3 dinner guests kind of idea. And, we were kind of goalkeeper and soccer focused with Ben, and he mentioned one Sir Alex Ferguson. He mentioned as a current goalkeeper Manuel Neuer, which if you're working on becoming a more of a field player / goalkeeper, well, Manuel Neuer is a good guy to talk to, so that one makes total sense. But his legend that he would invite to the table was Edwin van der Sar.
Okay.
And for a 6'6" goalkeeper, Edwin van der Sar makes a ton of sense, right? Mm-hmm. Who would be your favorite goalkeepers that you'd like to pick their brain about the craft?
Okay, so I have to start with Marcus Hanneman, which a lot of you Americans would love to hear, I'm sure. That was the goalkeeper that there was a couple of goalkeepers before him when I was a Reading fan, but he was really the one that once I was old enough to start appreciating the art of goalkeeping, he was the one that I looked at, and he was very influential at Reading, a really nice guy. I'm sure we wouldn't really agree on our gun politics and things like that, but we might have a couple of interesting discussions there. But he also wasn't the biggest guy. I'm thinking 6'2", 6'3", maybe, which still large compared to myself, but in terms of professional goalkeepers on the men's side, not by any means the tallest. So definitely Marcus Hanneman. David Seaman would be one for me. I have watched every single David Seaman goalkeeper nightmare video. I think what was really important about David Seaman was his mentality at recovering from errors. Yeah. I mean, we can remember some very famous errors he made, but he was always very honest about those mistakes. And as a goalkeeper, whenever I was young and would think back to letting in a horrible goal, my dad would put that video on and I would watch and see that all goalkeepers make mistakes. All goalkeepers are human, and you have to have a goldfish memory per se. And then, that's a tough one on the last one. There's so many good goalkeepers. Does that have to be? I would like to sit down with Steve Coppell, which again is on the Reading side of thing. He's the first manager that ever got Reading promoted into the Premier League, and he created such a good style of play for Reading, who were used to not playing the best soccer. He was very big on the wings and stuff. But if I had to pick another goalkeeper, we need to go with one on the female side. So I'm trying to pick who I'd want to sit with. If we talk about goalkeeper, I want to sit down with Grace Maloney again, who plays for Reading now. Mm-hmm. But on the old side, maybe Karen Bardsley we'll go with, because she was great for the Lionesses, and she was a tall one, not like me, but I think she was very influential growing up during a time when I was kind of trying to find myself as a goalkeeper and think about moving to America and stuff like that. So let's go with, I picked too many, but we'll go with those.
That's a big table, but that's okay.
Hey, it's okay. I'm just there to listen. I'm not partaking in the table. I'm just listening.
See, I haven't told you that Marcus Hahnemann broke my soccer fan heart back in the day.
Why?
When he was with the Seattle Sounders.
Okay.
Before, this is A-League Seattle Sounders. This is, he was probably 22, 23. It was his first professional spot.
Okay.
I think it was his second year. And in 1995, that was the first year of the Atlanta Ruckus. It was the first division by default in 95, the year before MLS started. And Atlanta had John Doyle, who had played for the national team, Bruce Murray, who at the time was the U.S. men's national team all-time leading scorer. Winalda ended up passing him, and then Donovan and Dempsey have later on. Justin Fashanu from England came over to play with that Atlanta Ruckus team. Lennon Steenkamp from South Africa. I mean, that was the year I graduated high school, and it was the first time we had a professional team.
What a perfect time for you to get a team.
Yeah, so I was at every game. I was obsessed. It was great, and they made it to the final on the back of the old school shootout. You remember the NASL MLS shootout? Yes, the 35-yard dribble up deal.
American style shootout, as you call it.
Yes, it was such a stupid league rule that they had that year that if it was a draw at the end of regulation, it went to the shootout, and you win the game in regulation, you got 3 points. If you won the game in a shootout, you got 2 points in the standings. If you lost the shootout, you got 1.
It's not as stupid, Jason, as overtime in college where you have overtime, but if you draw, you can draw. Now that I will never understand.
That's pretty stupid.
If you have to have a winner, how can you still have a draw after overtime?
Yes, that's really stupid. This way you at least knew how the game was going to be decided. But where it got really dumb, first off, Atlanta was great in the shootout. They, I think, lost 1 shootout all season long. They wouldn't have made the playoffs in a normal league format. They would have missed out. But they got into the playoffs based off the shootout. They played the Montreal Impact in the semifinals, who were the best team in the regular season. It was a 2 of 3 series. You had to win 2 games, no matter how you won them. So the first game was at Adams Stadium, North Druid Hills, a little high school stadium, about 60 yards wide. I mean, it was just ridiculous. But they won the game via shootout. They went to Montreal, got spanked in game 2, won game 3 in Montreal via the shootout. So then they get to play the Seattle Sounders. And in the first game at Adams Stadium, Atlanta won, you guessed it, by the shootout. John Doyle was the master of the shootout. You see all the different approaches in these things where guys will like pop the ball up and hit a volley. Guys will dribble in.
How long did you have to get from the halfway line to the goal?
It wasn't the halfway line. It was 35 yards away. So it was kind of halfway between the top of the arc and the halfway line. It was 5 seconds.
Oh, that's not long.
No,
really.
No, it's not. You would see goalkeepers who were just amazing at it. And Atlanta had a great one in Moon Young-yi from South Korea who was just so good at the shootout. He'd come out really quick and close the ground fast and almost get to like
panic. You create panic in the forward. You don't want a goalkeeper running at you when you're already thinking about what you're trying to do.
He was so aware because he'd get to probably 16 yards from goal, so he had a little bit of wiggle room inside the 18 so he could make a save, but he'd come out and get big, and he would make attackers panic. So they were riding him, and then they had players who were very good in the shootout. So they beat Seattle in game 1. They go to Seattle. They get spanked in game 2. Game 3 to decide the league champion, and it goes to a shootout, and Hahnemann was amazing and made the saves that Seattle needed, and he had a couple of big saves during the match as well to win.
That's what I
Seattle.
loved. Honestly, that was one of the things I loved about Marcus. Because he's a smaller goalkeeper, he was always very good at one-on-ones, and so it doesn't surprise me that he was brilliant in the shootout. But I think you got lured into a false sense of security because that's where they had been so strong all season.
I think they went. I mean, it was something absurd, like 14 wins in the shootout and 2 losses. I mean, it wasn't like, okay, they're 5-2. It was ridiculous. It's like it goes to shootout, you think it's automatic. But we should have known better because Hahnemann made a huge save, like really late in the game, on a 1v1. And it was a 1v1 that could have sealed it. Shot was slightly mishit. Hahnemann makes the save, saves the rebound. And
he got in their heads.
A little bit.
When we talked a couple of episodes ago about those saves where it's not going to be your day, it was probably one of those saves.
It was, and Marcus Hahnemann made me very upset as a young soccer fan when I was in college watching that game, because it was funny because the season started when I was in high school. I missed 2 games that year. One of them was my high school graduation, and then was in college by the time it got to the final. So, trying to find a place to watch that game. It's not like now, like you had to find some random channel that was airing it live, and it was madness.
It's like how I had to watch Reading games for the longest here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you'd have to find, back then it was like finding a bar with the right kind of satellite dish that could pick up whatever the Seattle regional sports channel was to get the game live. Otherwise, you had to wait until it was going to be played on tape delay 2 days later. It was absurd. But Marcus Hahnemann, I still have issues with Marcus Hahnemann. So I would not come crash your table if Marcus Hahnemann was there.
Okay, well, you're not invited anyway, Jason. I got too many people.
I would. My goalkeepers, Tony Miola was the big one when I was growing up, and I was still playing goalkeeper. He was young, and he had an incredible mullet back in the day. I mean, Miola's mullet was legendary. And he was one of the first like kind of stars for the U.S. men's national team. So I definitely want Tony Miola there. I would want Brianna Scurry there because I've met her, and she's very cool. And I loved picking her brain about her time with the Atlanta Beat, her time with the national team. I love that she's now involved with the Washington Spirit. Brianna Scurry would be at my table. So Brianna Scurry, Tony Miola. I would go completely off the board and take Jorge Luis Chilavert from Paraguay, because
that is off the board.
He is an incredibly intimidating goalkeeper. When you would see him, he looked like somebody you did not want to go up for a cross with. But he was also one of those goalkeepers that would take penalties and take free kicks.
Yes, and oh my gosh, those highlights. Again, it's back to David Seaman's goalkeeping nightmares, but there would be goalkeepers scoring goals. And when you would watch those ones and they ball out and they come out, and you got to think, you've got to be pretty confident from the free kick to come up and take that you're going to finish or at least get a shot on target or close. Otherwise, you're completely out of position.
Mm-hmm.
You know who Sebastian would never forgive me for not picking, by the way? I just read when you talked about
Renee Higuita?
Yep.
Yeah,
exactly. Scorpion kick at Wembley Stadium. They say that he had already seen the offside flag go up, and that's why he did it. But I'm not going to go with. I'm going to say he had the confidence in himself to do it.
He needed it after what happened against Cameroon in 1990, because that's what I always remember about Higuita. And tell Sebastian I'm very sorry for even bringing this up. Where Higuita got caught in possession because I mean he was so good on the ball.
We've seen the videos.
Yeah. Roger Mila just strips him, and it ends up sealing the game. That's the risk. You're going to play that way, and it serves you well. You will get caught at some point. You just hope it's not in a World Cup round of 16.
Just definitely one of the most exciting goalkeepers to watch, and unpredictable would be a good word as well.
I was really close to inviting Jorge Campos to the table too. Maybe I'll have a super large table and have Chilavert, and I'll invite Higuita and Campos along with Miola and Scurry. That'll be a fun conversation.
That's a fascinating. We need that one video recorded.
Yeah, we need to create a goalkeeping roundtable with that one. We'll work on it. We'll get a sponsor for it. We'll work on it. We'll get
we have great ideas here.
Yeah. That's what the show's turned into. It's been a brainstorming session today. So for you guys out there who listen to Soccer Down Here and listen to Written on the Pitch, if you have questions, first off, if you're a subscriber, you have access to a special channel on our Discord to submit questions like Ricky Ricardo did. If you have questions, you can tweet at me at Longshoe. You can tweet at the general network at Soccer Down Here. And Jess, where can they tweet at you?
At Jess Talks Footy with an IE, much to the disdain of the poll that I got tagged in where people were asking the correct way to spell footy.
Oh,
IE.
They went against you. They went with the Y?
Uh-huh.
I've seen both, so I'm not really like partial to either one. I'm okay either way.
I think I'm okay with both, but it's IE if you want to tweet me, guys.
Okay.
FOOTIE.
And you can tweet questions like Day did. And thanks, Day. And thanks, Ricky, for your questions. And thanks to everybody who listens. And we'll be back next week with more talk, we'll actually have some Atlanta United footage to talk about. It's a joint training session with Charleston Battery this weekend, and probably we'll get to see at least a couple of the goalkeepers, I would assume. I don't know if all three will see time in the way it's structured, but at least a couple. So that whole idea of playing out of the back and the Atlanta goalkeepers doing it, we'll have some footage to talk about next week.
Looking forward to it, Jason.